Hey, Ben, it's Aaron.
Hey, Aaron, it's Ben.
So, Ben, how long have you been following NASCAR?
A lifetime.
It's the same for me. How funny and how fitting then that we would host a lifetime in NASCAR. Getting ready for episode 3 of the A Lifetime in NASCAR podcast. I'm Aaron Burns. Speaking with me is my co-host Ben White, and we're going to talk about contemporary NASCAR topics. Going to discuss those with a historic slant, highlighting NASCAR's illustrious history with analysis and anecdotes from Ben and myself. You're going to hear about famous races, moments, drivers, cars. We're going to highlight them in every 1-hour episode. You'll learn about where the sport has been, where it will go, and the inside scoop on some of the craziest stories you'll ever hear. So Ben, to kick things off, this is episode number 3. It couldn't be more appropriate for us to discuss the history of the number 3 car, its most notable drivers. I will defer to you at the start. What are some things and some personality that you remember who drove that car? I think we're going to talk about the same guy for a little bit.
I think we're going to, Aaron, and of course it was Dale Earnhardt who really put the number 3 on the map, but you got to go a little bit further back, of course, with Junior Johnson, who drove the car. A lot of people don't realize that Junior Johnson, the team owner, was also Junior Johnson, the driver, and he did win some races with the number 3. But, you know, going way, way back, you might ask the question, when was the number 3 first used in NASCAR? And I have an answer to that. There was a driver named Bill Snowden who first drove the number 3 in a Nash. That's a car type, by the way, at Okanochee NC Speedway on August 7th, 1949. The first time that the number 3 went to victory lane, a driver by the name of Dick Rathman won a race in a Hudson Hornet at Oakland, California, at the Oakland Stadium, March 28th, 1954, and he won a whopping $1,000. So there you go.
So what you're saying is the first 2 winners and the first 2 cars that won, none of them are around anymore.
No, long time ago, and actually, the Bill Snowden one, I don't really think he was just the first to use it, but the first person to drive and win in the number 3 was Dick Rathman. But see, the car number goes way back, and if you look at the statistics, the NASCAR record book, of course, it's a who's who type of list of people who have won in the number 3. Of course, you've got, David Pearson. I mentioned Junior Johnson, Buddy Baker, Bobby Isaac, Charlie Glotzback won a race there, Paul Goldsmith, Dick Rathman actually won 3 races in the number 3. Ricky Rudd actually won the first race for Richard Childress Racing using the number 3, and that came in 1983.
That's right.
And there's been a lot of drivers who've driven number 3, but the one who's, of course, been the most successful in the number 3 was Dale Earnhardt, and he won 67 of his 76 career victories driving the car number 3.
That's pretty impressive. And since then, Austin Dillon has grabbed a couple victories. I think we were both at Austin's first win in 2017, and then he's won a couple since then. So that car has an incredibly impressive history. To touch on Dale Earnhardt, certainly the man, when people think of the number 3, he's synonymous not just with that car number, but for a lot of people, he's synonymous with NASCAR as a sport. He is, the larger than life character that many, have always said. And when they think of Dale Earnhardt, I would imagine very few people would think of Dale Earnhardt driving the number 15 Ford for Bud Moore or driving the number 2 for Rod Osterlund. They think of Dale Earnhardt driving that black number 3, or if you're really old school, driving that gorgeous blue and yellow number 3 Monte Carlo sponsored by Wrangler, which for my vote is the coolest race car ever. That is my favorite car. If I could drive any race car, put me in that 1987 Monte Carlo. I don't know how well I would do, but it would be a whole lot of fun. And, discussing the guys who've driven the 3 car, certainly Dale had so much success in it. He won 6 of his 7 championships in that car. Many of Dale's greatest moments come in the 3 car. for me, I have one really special Dale Earnhardt moment. I never got to meet the man. I've met Dale Jr. many times. I've met Kerry. I've met Kelly. I've met Jeffrey. They are all phenomenal people. Dale Jr. is one of the best people that I've ever, had the chance to interview or collaborate with in the sport. And so, it's always wonderful to hear from him. He has a tremendous passion for history, just like you and I. So it's very easy to relate to him. And, for me as a kid growing up, I think I touched on this in episode 1 that, my dad was a Dale Earnhardt fan when Dale raced, and so I became a Dale Jr. fan because I thought it would be so cool for the father to pull for the father and the son to pull for the son. So I've always looked up to Dale Jr. He's a phenomenal person. He also won 2 Xfinity championships in the 3-car. So you're opening up a whole other can of worms when you bring up what has happened in other divisions, because you've got Dale Jr. winning championships in the 3-car. Steve Park had a lot of success in it, among many other people. And then, of course, Mike Skinner won championships in it in the Truck Series. So there's been a ton of success. But when I think of a successful race in the 3-car, for me, it's the 1993 All-Star race at Charlotte. It's the only time I saw Dale Earnhardt win a race. It's a special moment for me because I was at that race with my mom and dad, and it was the second race I'd ever attended. I was 5 years old, and my dad, at his workplace, they had a race pool, and you would draw positions based on where guys qualified, and he drew Dale Earnhardt for the Winston, which was, for him, I can only imagine how cool that is because it's it's his favorite driver, and it's the race that we're going to. And it's at Dale's home track. It's at my home track. So, we're excited about it. And hey, you can win some money. You can't turn that down, right? And then they have this exciting finish. Dale jumped the start. They didn't put him at the rear, thank God. And then on the second one, Dale drives away from Mark Martin. And I vividly remember 5-year-old me with a blonde mullet in row 10 in the grandstands yelling, "Come on, Earnhardt, come on, Earnhardt." And it sounded even more redneck than that, I'm sure. And, my dad would, probably says like, "Yeah, it was the day we pulled him through and he won the race. So we won some money, so I was excited for my dad, for him winning the race pool, because we weren't very lucky with that usually, but also as personally for me as a fan, that was a really special experience to share with your dad. Even as a 5-year-old, I was a couple months from starting school, but I remember that moment vividly. I don't remember much of that day. I just remember that moment, the last lap, Earnhardt pulling away from Mark Martin and winning the race. It wound up being Dale's final All-Star win. Probably not as memorable a one as the one he got in 1987, the Pass in the Grass. But for me, the most special Dale Earnhardt win was the only one I got to see in person. So for you, Ben, what are a couple special Dale Earnhardt memories you have?
Well, the one that comes to mind as far as my favorite Dale Earnhardt race, of course, 1998, the Daytona 500 was great, and it was closing the door on finally getting that win after 20 years of trying in the Daytona 500. But the one that really stands out was October of 2000 at Talladega, when he went from 18th to 1st in 5 laps. And I'm telling you, I swear I saw it with my own eyes, and everyone in the press box was standing up looking at this unfold, because you think about Talladega, you're 3 wide and it's really hard to pass and so many things can happen, but he just threaded that needle lap after lap, and at the end of the thing he was out front. Kenny Wallace was running second, and you thought, how in the world did he do that? And it was miraculous. It was almost he had angels or something driving with him, because it was so phenomenal to see him do it. But that was the way, how smooth he really was, especially on the super speedways. And I remember, talking about Dale, I remember at Martinsville one year, I believe 97 maybe, we were there, and of course he was out front, and we were all marveling at the fact, now this is a short track, but we were marveling at the fact that we're looking down through the inside or the passenger side window, and he's got his arm on the spider bar, and he's driving with his left hand, and he did that for 250 or 300 laps, and just like he was on a Sunday drive. And that's what we asked him in the press box. So what's the deal about the arm on the spider bar? It was a Sunday drive, and that's how well he mastered the short tracks. But he also was so good on the super speedways. But I do want to share this with you real quick, Aaron, and it's a story that's coming out in Pole Position magazine, and I want all of our listeners to get Pole Position magazine. It's an awesome magazine that we also help to produce.
That's polepositionmag.com, by the way, for everybody listening.
Yeah, and there's a story that's coming up in there that I've had the honor to work on, and people have asked me the question, how did the number 3 become a black number 3? And I was like, well, you know what? I don't know, but I'm going to get the answer. So a couple of years ago, I went to Richard Childress and I asked him, how did you come up with the black scheme? And so he said, well, I'll tell you the honest truth. So when Wrangler went away, and we went to the Goodwrench paint scheme in 1988. We had to come up with something that would really pop on the racetrack. So there were several paint schemes that they tried. They tried, get this, they tried a blue number 3 Goodwrench car because, the GM Parts logo there was blue. And they tried that.
That's right.
Didn't really like it too much. Tried some white and blue. Didn't really do what they wanted. Tried some red, black, and silver in a way different paint scheme. Not too crazy about it. And they're all sitting around and, looking at charts and looking at drawings and looking at things. What are we going to do? And this is a true story. One of the Goodwrench executives, out of frustration, basically said, oh, heck, why don't you just paint the thing black? And he was being facetious at the time, but they're like, why not? So they tried a black, paint scheme, and that's when they had the silver numbers instead of the white numbers the first year, and I think the next year they changed them to white.
Wasn't it chrome for 88?
Yeah, it was kind of a silverish chrome color. And so, you think, well, wow, they had to put a lot of energy and a lot of thought and all these things. No, not really. It's just one of those frustrating moments where someone threw up their hands and said, well, what the heck? Just paint the thing black. We tried everything else. And that's a true story. And there's a little piece coming up about that in the magazine. It'll be fun to read. But yeah, that's how a lot of these things come together, is by happenstance or fate or whatever you want to call it. And it became one of the most iconic paint schemes in NASCAR history.
Yeah, I think it's definitely had an indelible impact on people. And from what I see on the pole position, the NASCAR pole position Twitter account, there are a lot of people who were born after Dale's untimely passing who still hold him in a very high regard and speak of him with reverence because they recognize his greatness. Not unlike if you were a Formula One fan and Ayrton Senna. It's a lot of comparisons can be made there, and we could probably discuss that for a little while. I'm a big Formula One fan too. But to speak of Dale's paint scheme for just a second, I've seen all those renderings. The late, great Sam Bass, I have to give Sam a shout out. Sam was NASCAR's first officially licensed artist. We lost Sam a couple of years ago after a long battle with cancer, I believe it was. And Sam was a good friend of mine when I worked at the Speedway. And I collaborated with him on some projects. And I had heard and found out that he was the one who designed these paint schemes for Dale. And I've seen all these renderings. And oh my gosh, they look so different than the finished product. I mean, there were really cool paint schemes. One was it was kind of like the Wrangler scheme. So envision the yellow and blue Wrangler car. If you're listening, pull that car up if you don't immediately recognize it. There's chances are you probably do. But so imagine where the yellow was silver, and where the blue was on the Wrangler car, it was black, and then the number was a bright red. Which honestly, that silver and red combination that would end up coming in a different manner a little bit 7 years later for the Winston in '95, which kind of ushered in the era of new paint schemes. But they came close to actually using that one. That was one of the choices. But whoever made that call at Goodwrench, RC, Dale, whoever, they made the right decision because that car was bad to the bone. And I think everybody in the field hated seeing it in the rearview mirror. But, for better or worse, most of the time it wasn't in their rearview mirror. It was in front of them. And that's where I think all of us remember that car being out front.
Yeah, it's true. And I remember Bobby Allison telling me, I was asking him about the Intimidator and how it was to race against Dale and stuff. He said, well, be honest with you, there were some drivers that would see that black number 3 come up in the mirror and pretty much spin out on their own.
Yeah, I mean, he was just intimidating.
It's like, okay, they had to brace themselves and had to turn left and had to get ready for him to come. And if they'd have just calmed down and realized, that he's coming up on them and just race him, but some of the guys would actually spin out, thinking, here he comes. And there was something so, I'm sorry to use the word again, intimidating about that black paint scheme.
Yeah.
That you just, like, that suited him, though. That it was one of those fate situations, I think, because it just suited his personality. It suited his driving style. And, and I'll say this too, Aaron, there's times that you see a rendering on paper, and then you think that is the coolest thing I've ever seen. And then you put it out there on a racetrack and it just doesn't pop. It just doesn't do what you want it to do.
Absolutely.
And of course, the idea is that if you're going to put a sponsor's name on a race car, obviously you want it to pop, and so people can see it from the stands and from television, and you just think that's a winner, that's going to be great. Then you see it on the track and it just doesn't work. So that's kind of where the black came from.
Speaking of black cars, that point that you made is very valid. I've actually experienced it from an opposite end with Dale Earnhardt Jr. So in 2010, he was sponsored by Amp Energy Juice, and they did this deal where they came up with the Legend of Talladega for the Talladega Fall Race, which I went to that weekend. I lived in Alabama at the time, so it was easy for me to go. But they did the rendering for this car, and it came out on the internet, and it was black in the front, and it was kind of like beigeish yellow in the back. It looked like kind of like a rotten banana color. Like it did not look very good. And I remember saying, like, that is the ugliest paint scheme I've ever seen in my life. And then I saw the car on track, and it was gorgeous. It had this bright, striking, vibrant neon yellow. The splitter on the front was neon yellow. It transitioned from black to neon yellow. It was gorgeous. It's one of my favorite paint schemes I've ever seen. But you are right. To your point, when you see the rendering, sometimes it doesn't do justice to what it could be. It could be better. It could be worse. Speaking of things that started out really good and got better, though, and speaking of people who accomplished something Dale Earnhardt accomplished, let's transition and discuss a little bit about drivers who won a race as a rookie. Dale Earnhardt did that. He's one of the most famous ones to do it. He wasn't driving the number 3 car at the time. He was driving the number 2 car. It happened at Bristol, then Bristol International Raceway, I think was the name of it, in 1979. When he won the Volunteer 500, I think. I'm going on rote memorization, so if somebody looks it up, I may be right, I may be wrong. I've read a lot of Dale Earnhardt books, and I feel fairly confident in that, but yeah. I know he did win. April of 79 was his first win of 76. It was his only win as a rookie, but at that time, Ben, this is just before you started covering the sport full time, but it was almost unheard of for a rookie to win. First of all, it was pretty rare if Richard Petty, Darrell Waltrip, Buddy Baker, or Bobby Allison didn't win the race. I'll throw Benny Parsons in there too. But this guy, Earnhardt, comes out as a rookie driving Rod Osterland's car. He had let Dave Marcus go. Some people were questioning that. Should you really let this accomplished guy who can wheel it, Dave Marcus, go for this rookie? And Dave Marcus is a very good driver, but those concerns kind of ended up like, if you're a basketball fan, well, gee, should we really trade Vlade Divac for Kobe Bryant? I mean, Kobe Bryant's unproven. How good can he be? Well, it was like, how good can this Earnhardt kid be? Yeah, his dad raced. He's raced mostly on dirt. How good can he be? Well, they found out very quickly, just a couple months into Dale's rookie season, he won a race. But there's a lot of guys, when you look back through history, who won a race as rookies. It just so happened that Dale kind of ushered that era in, where younger drivers, they typically had to work very hard to get to the top. So in a lot of cases, a rookie wasn't driving very good equipment, so it was rare for them to even have a chance to win a race. And then they had to have the reliability, they had to have the driving skill. Dale Earnhardt had that. Davey Allison had that. Davey won a couple of races. Tony Stewart won some races. Who were some rookies who did really well that stand out to you?
Well, the ones that really stand out, and I was surprised. I went back and looked at this. There's actually 21 drivers who won in their rookie season in the modern era, from 1974, starting with Earl Ross, who was a Canadian driver that drove for Junior Johnson. He won one race, and it was at Martinsville. And you go all the way up to Cole Custer, who won last year at Kentucky. But
that's right.
Yeah, but 21 drivers did that. And one thing I want to add to what you said about Bristol, Dale Earnhardt's car was the blue and yellow, but it had number twos on it, and it had no sponsorship whatsoever, and other than just being fielded out of Osterland's pocket. But you're right. The car was kind of off in the corner on jack stands, tires off, working on it. But he had people like Jake Elder, working on the car, which is a great crew chief who helped Darrell Waltrip and several others, and also started his career at Holman Moody. So he had a little bit of ammo in the gun there, but the car was unsponsored, but he ended up winning. But yeah, going back to the list of drivers, you got. Dale Earnhardt, as you said, 79. Ron Burchard pulled off a great win in 81 when he snookered Terry Labonte and Darrell Waltrip coming to the flag, and they didn't realize he was on the lead lap, and he beat him by a bumper and a 3-wide finish in 1981. So that was also a great one.
And he also drove a blue and yellow car.
He did.
In that race, in the 47 car. Did. The race, I think it was Race Hill Farms 47 car.
Yep, and a team owner was a guy named Jack Beebe, who later sold his team to Cale Yarborough a few years later. But Morgan Shepherd also won at Martinsville. And then you had Davey Allison winning in 87 at Talladega, which that was a great hometown type finish, very popular finish. You had Tony Stewart in 99 winning for JGR, Joe Gibbs Racing. Denny Hamlin wins in 2006 at Pocono for JGR. Juan Montoya in 2007. Logano in 2009, Brad Keselowski in 2009. So, and of course, who can forget the Trevor Bayne Daytona 500 big surprise 2011 for the Wood brothers. So, yeah, and Chris Buescher at Pocono, and then you get to Custer. So there's a lot of guys who have come out of the box winning a race, but you're right, back to your point, back to Dale Earnhardt. Yeah, he had a decent car that day, but it was in an era where the toughest of the toughest were going to come out at the top at the end of 500 laps, and you just didn't expect a rookie driver to win, but it showed you the talent Dale Earnhardt had, and he was pretty rough around the edges until he had to, hone his skill among those types of drivers. But yeah, it's amazing how many of these guys have won in their rookie year and went on to do incredible things in their careers.
Absolutely, and a couple that come to mind for me to add to yours are Dale Earnhardt Jr. and Matt Kenseth in 2000. Followed Tony Stewart's lead. Dale Jr. won 2 races in the first half of the season, and he won the All-Star race. I mean, I'm not sure there's been a driver come out of the gate with as much hype as Dale Jr. had and instantly live up to that hype. I mean, there was a point, I think, in the early part of 2000 where people were like, this guy's already a top 5 or top 10 driver. I mean, he won at Texas. He wins at Richmond. He wins the All-Star race. I mean, that's an incredible start. Like, to think that by the time you get to June of Dale Jr.'s rookie year, in this team that's 3 years old, Dale Earnhardt Incorporated, it's his 3rd full season as a race team in the Cup Series, never won a race, and Dale Jr. jumps in that car and just flat out blew him away at Texas. And drove to the victory at Richmond, and then that incredible drive to win the Winston, passing Dale Jarrett on the outside on the penultimate lap, and then that was the month of rookies for NASCAR in 2000. Honestly, Ben, because then you got Dale Jr. winning at Richmond. Dale Jr. wins the All-Star race. Dale Jr. dominated the 600 the next week, and another rookie, Matt Kenseth, won it. And Matt Kenseth is still the most recent rookie to win the 600. It's been 20 years since then. Nobody's done it, which speaks to the difficulty of winning a race as a rookie. Those guys were able to do it. Kevin Harvick, a year later, winning that emotional race just a few weeks after Dale's untimely passing. Kevin just beats Jeff Gordon to the finish line by, God, what was the length of a hot dog? I mean, it was that close at the finish line.
Very close, yeah.
Yeah, and
close.
So you've got that emotional win. The thing that sticks in my mind about that is Chocolate Myers from Dale's crew, the Goodwrench crew that stuck with Harvick, him just crying openly after that race is over. It was such a cathartic victory. It was a year of cathartic victories, with Steve Park winning at Rockingham the week after Dale died, Kevin Harvick winning at Atlanta a couple of weeks later. They go back to Daytona. Dale Earnhardt Jr. in his second year wins his first race at Daytona. So there were a lot of big wins. right after Dale's passing, but that's also kind of when you had that biggest cluster of guys who were rookies coming in and winning races. So 99, you had Tony Stewart. 2000, Dale Jr., Matt Kenseth. 2001, Kevin Harvick. Kurt Busch comes in and lights it on fire pretty soon after that. And then Ryan Newman, the Rookie of the Year in 2002. Ryan Newman had a phenomenal rookie season of winning races. He won the All-Star race as well. He's the most recent rookie to win that race. And then there's that guy, Jimmy Johnson, too. Probably shouldn't forget about him. Jimmy Johnson. Yeah. Jimmy Johnson. Okay, so I vividly remember getting a copy of TV Guide. I don't even know if they still make TV Guide. I got a copy of TV Guide. It was a NASCAR preview for 2002. They ranked all the drivers. So I got it, and I opened it up. I think Kevin Harvick was on the cover. And the first thing I'm like, all right, where they rank Dale Jr.? So I'm reading the top 20, and then there's they ranked the top 20 or the top 25. And then there was 5 others to watch that didn't crack their top 25. And one was that new guy at Hendrick Johnson, and I didn't know much about him. He was that guy who had that bad wreck at Watkins Glen. And they didn't rank him in the top 25. I mean, nobody expected somebody with I'm not going to say so-so. He had a pretty good Xfinity resume, but he was driving for Herzog Motorsports, so it wasn't like he was with a super team. And he comes in, wins the pole for the Daytona 500, and now we're almost 19 years later, and Jimmy's getting ready to make his IndyCar debut after winning 7 Cup championships. All that started with his immediate success as a rookie, coming in and winning at Auto Club Speedway in the spring of 2002, and that really catapulted him 5 championships in a row, 06 to 2010. The whole time I was in college, Jimmy Johnson was the only champion. So I witnessed part of 5 seasons when I was in college, although I was only in college for 4 years. I didn't take the victory lap. But every year that I was in college, for any point, Jimmy Johnson was the NASCAR Cup Series champion. It was kind of crazy. And then he goes out and wins 2 more and has solidified himself in that pantheon with Dale Earnhardt and Richard Petty. So then there's been so many impressive rookies to win. I think, Ben, when you look at the more recent winners, Cole Custer you brought up, that was a surprise. Under different circumstances. When you look at the guys who are coming up in this crop of drivers who now we look at as, all right, they're the present and the future. Chase Elliott, Kyle Larson, his teammate at Hendrick, Eric Jones. If you would have said, all right, those 3 in 2016 all are in very good rides, capable of winning races and maybe championships. And of that crop, the first one to win was Chris Buescher. Nobody expected that. It was it was fog delayed race, but still pretty crazy. There's been so many rookies to win. I do think that, in my opinion, one of the most notable, because it was so rare at the time, was Dale Earnhardt. And Dale Earnhardt, having had so much success as a rookie, as a veteran, every time he's strapped in the race car, Dale Earnhardt is driver of the week for episode 3 of A Lifetime in NASCAR. We could probably spend a lifetime, Ben, talking about all of Dale Earnhardt's accomplishments.
We could.
But
we sure could.
I know you've got one that's really special to you. Tell me about your favorite encounter with Dale Earnhardt, or your favorite memory with Dale.
Oh, well, I got to go back to one, and we may have already discussed this before, but just something that really meant a lot to me, and it sort of happened, just out of the blue. And it was the second year we went to Japan. We went to Suzuki and Motegi those 2 years. We went 3 years, and one was an oval. Motegi was an oval, and the other track was a road course. But I didn't go the first year, but I went the second and third years, and I was just sitting in a tent that they had set up for American food. If you want to go in for bacon and eggs and grits and fruit, whatever juice, you could go in there. Or if you wanted the traditional Japanese type meal, you could go to this other place. So I'm sitting there minding my own business.
What did you get, by the way? Were you eating American food or Japanese food?
I was doing American, yeah.
You should have branched out, man.
Yeah, and I know some of the race teams, they took cases and cases and cases of beanie weenies and sausages and crackers.
It's not a different planet.
Yeah, I know, but these are racers. They didn't know what to expect.
Yeah.
So anyway, they take all that stuff. But yeah, I'm sitting there. I had the traditional bacon and eggs, and somebody comes up behind me me and just kicks the snot out of my chair. And I look around, I thought, well, who in the world? And it was Earnhardt. He said, what are you doing? So what do you think I'm doing? I'm eating my eggs. He said, can I sit down with you? I said, absolutely. So he sat down with me, and that was the most relaxed I had ever known Dale Earnhardt to be, because and he was just having fun. There were no points on the line. He was over there, and he said, you know what the coolest thing is over here? He said, I don't mean this in a bad way, but it's really cool. I said, what's that? He said, no one knows me. And I could actually come over here and just have fun and just, visit with the fans. And there's no points on the line. This is the coolest place in the world. And so we just sat and talked about Kannapolis and talked about this and that. And I said, well, listen, I've enjoyed having breakfast with you. I need to talk to you about something else I'm working on. He said, well, what are you doing right now? I said, well, nothing except taking my tray over here to put it away. He said, well, come on, I've got this little bungalow thing I'm supposed to stay in when I'm not outside. So let's just come with me. He was an entirely different person. I'm telling you straight up, Aaron. He didn't act like the normal, typical Dale Earnhardt, because, people would pull at him all the time at a race,
a NASCAR
points race. And so we go to this little bungalow, and it's probably, I call it that. It's probably a 20 by 30. It's just a small building. It's not very big at all. And every driver and team had one. So we go in there, and he has a stack of cards he's signing. And I just remember how we were watching these three Japanese ladies on television on the closed monitor there. They were singing something in Japanese, and he got so tickled about, look at that, look at that, look at that. He was laughing more than I'd ever seen him laugh. And we sat there, we talked, I did my little interview. He took his boots off, put his feet up on the coffee table. He eventually fell asleep, and I just kind of slipped out. But it was one of those, I equate it to this. If you were a guitar player and you had a chance to play guitars with Elvis, and Elvis just says, hey, would you like to just come play guitars? I have nothing to do. Let's go play guitars. It was the same thing for me, and I will never, ever forget that experience. And, and then later in the weekend, he came up to me and he said, Junior stole my tires. Junior stole my tires after the race. He said, that's what happened. Why he didn't win the race is because Junior had somehow gone over and got his tires and put them on his car.
And that's Dale Jr., you mean, right?
Yeah, Dale Jr.,
okay.
Yeah. And he's like, Junior got my tires. I couldn't win. He was just a different person. And I'm telling you, man, that was the greatest experience that happened. It made going the 14-hour flight over and the 14-hour flight back worth every second, because it was so much fun to hang out with him. And he was so different sometimes if he could just relax. And in no disrespect to the fans, because he loved the fans, and I mean that sincerely, but there was just a time for him to sort of step out of his element and just have some fun. And it was a good weekend for him.
It definitely sounds like it. I'm curious if Dale Earnhardt tried sushi.
I don't know that for sure, but I would be willing to probably bet you that's a no answer.
Yeah. But it'd be interesting. Seeing Dale Earnhardt try sushi would be that would be an all-time culture clash to me.
Yeah,
but
I think so.
I'm sure somebody offered it to him. So, and you speaking of this, I'm assuming this was '98, because in '98 they ran at Motegi, and Dale Jr. That was the year Dale Jr. raced over there with Dale on the oval.
Right.
And a good friend of mine, Lenny Baticki, worked on Childress's team then for Mike Skinner in the Lowe's car, which won that race. Because, Dale Jr. and Dale Sr., they were fighting for the lead for quite a bit in this race. They were both front runners. Neither one of them wound up winning. It was the first time Dale Jr. ever raced against his dad in a Cup Series car. It was the first time he ever raced in a Cup Series car. In this exhibition race, he's in the number 1 Coca-Cola car. Dale's in the number 3 Coca-Cola car. And, Dale Jr. really acquitted himself very well in that race. He did a phenomenal job, whether it was stealing his dad's tires or not. I think he maybe was probably a little bit hesitant to give Dale Jr. all the credit, because Dale Jr. beat his dad in that race. He did finish higher. Mike Skinner won that race. So what I remember of that race is what Lenny told me, that Skinner's on the radio toward the end of this race. He's got the fastest car. He hasn't won a race all year. He's run really well. He wants to beat Dale. He wants to beat Dale Jr. He really wants to beat Jeff Gordon, who nobody could beat that year. I swear I feel like Jeff Gordon won 1,000 races in 1998. He did not win at Japan. Mike Skinner is leading the race in the last couple laps, and Lenny told me, he's like, Skinner was yelling on the radio, "Oh, I can't get down into turn 1. I can't get down to turn 3. This car's so tight. I can't drive it." And Larry McReynolds was his crew chief, and so Larry Mack's like, you got what you got, buddy. We put up the pit box already. You're just going to have to hold on to it. And so he's kind of coaxing him to win this race as Jeff Gordon is, charging, coming like a bat out of what. And, they come across the finish line. Skinner barely holds him off. I think Dale Jr. was 6th. Dale was pretty close right after that. Gordon finishes 2nd, right on Skinner's bumper. And Skinner yells on the radio, and they caught this on national TV. So I don't know if you heard it when you guys were over there, but on national TV, Skinner cues his mic up to Larry Mack, and he's like, "Yeah, we beat that little SOB." So if he didn't abbreviate it, and Buddy Baker, hears that, he's like, "Oh boy!" And him and Ken Squire were calling the race. They got a kick out of that. It was a big win for Mike Skinner. It's probably Mike Skinner's biggest win in NASCAR, honestly. I mean, it was the only time they ran on Motegi's oval in the Cup Series, and it was a big win. That was very impressive. He didn't end up winning a points race in the Cup Series, but to beat the talent that was over there, which was most of the Cups, most of the Cup Series best drivers, was really impressive. And then, the thing I remember from that, it was just listening to Lenny tell me about Mike Skinner yelling on the radio and saying he couldn't do it, and he didn't know how he was going to hold Gordon off. And Mike Skinner was a very expressive driver on the radio. I think Dale was quieter in some cases than Skinner was, but maybe it was just nerves. But Mike Skinner won that race. Obviously, very special day for him, and I'm very glad to hear, Ben. I didn't know that Dale had such an awesome experience then. I never got to meet Dale, like I said earlier, but in talking with all the people who have known Dale, Sam Bass told me one of the really neatest stories, and one of the coolest things I've ever seen was about 4 years ago. Sam showed me out his personal collection. He's like, "I got one autograph that you've never seen before." And I was like, "All right, what do you got?" And it was, he's like, "I've got Dale Earnhardt's full signature." So he did some work. He did a lot of work for Dale for years. They were very close friends, as you know. He painted Dale's paint schemes. So Dale's special paint schemes were all Sam Bass. But Sam still had this receipt from a project he had done for Dale, and it had his whole signature on it. He wrote like R and then like a little scriggle and then Dale Earnhardt. So it was so weird to see like Dale Earnhardt's full signature. It was kind of strange. But yeah, I mean, just, a colossal figure in the sport. And I think everybody who, whether they only saw him on television or they only read about him, if they saw him race like I did, if they interacted with him up front like you did, Dale Earnhardt left a bigger impact on the history of NASCAR, in my opinion, than any other driver. Because not only did he influence the sport by growing it so much and ushering in that era of national entertainment, passing the baton on to Jeff Gordon in that regard, but he brought so many fans into the sport for being the, coming up, the kind of a rough youth, lost his dad early on, had to, fight and scrap and claw just to get an opportunity, turned it into a golden opportunity and an illustrious career, but also all the things he did for so many other drivers. I talked to Ernie Irvan recently. He sponsored Irvin's first Cup race. He's like, "I'm not going to give you any money, but I'm going to give you notoriety, and that's going to help get you going." And he was right, because Ernie Irvan drove a Dale Earnhardt Chevrolet sponsored car to a top 10 finish at Charlotte in 1987. That springboarded him to a Cup Series career, winning more than a dozen races and very nearly winning a championship. But then Kenny Schrader, he got Schrader. He played an important role in getting Schrader started, certainly getting Steve Park started with the Dale Earnhardt Incorporated team when it went full-time in 98, and then springboarding Dale Jr.'s career into instant stardom when he began it in 2000. So Dale Earnhardt, in my opinion, Ben, and I'm sure you'd agree, I just think that when I look at all the people who had the biggest impacts on NASCAR, Bill France and Bill France Jr. are way up there for their influence over the sport. Richard Petty kind of made it relevant. Jeff Gordon and Dale Jr., Jimmy Johnson, Tony Stewart, those guys helped make it global, but Dale Earnhardt put it on the map, I think, more than anybody else.
Yeah, I agree with you there, and I think part of it was that it was very simple. He could, he resonated with the fans because they were just like him. He didn't come in with a 10 or $20 million, racing budget. He didn't come in with a motorhome or a jet. He came in pretty much with two quarters in his pocket, hoping to make enough money to buy dinner and to maybe get. I remember there was a story. He went to Daytona in '75, and he didn't have the money to buy oil to put in his transporter, and so he went to Union or somebody and got a couple of cases of oil because he didn't have it, and he knew he needed at least a quart every 100 miles or maybe even 50 miles, and that's the kind of thing that the fans could relate to. It's like, hey, you know what, I worked on my car last weekend and I had a problem with the oil pan on my car, and so did Dale Earnhardt, one of those things. And so yeah, but I tell you what, there was nobody more surprised in the entire country of Japan than I was when he walked up to me and kicked my chair that day and said, "Hey, can I sit down with you?" Because I was like, heck yeah. I mean, I was just super honored that he wanted to come have breakfast with me. And what was so cool about it was he didn't really want to talk about racing. He wanted to talk about fishing and hunting and what I did on the farm and growing up in Kannapolis. I had a great interview with Dale one time about, growing up in Kannapolis, and a very quick story. I might have shared this with you before. I'll make it very brief. But basically, he came in one night about 2:30 in the morning. He was supposed to be home at midnight, and he told me, he said, if I turned, he had a little Nova, and two-door Nova. He said, if I turned off the engine at a certain place and it didn't bottom out into the driveway, then I could get in, and my mom and dad wouldn't hear me come in. So he does that. He said, I'm in the clear. I'm good. Slipped through the back door of the kitchen, gets up the steps, and he said he knew the steps, the ones that creaked, so he had to not hit those, and he knew how to step over those. And he was about halfway up the steps, and then he heard a voice in the dark, "Where you been, boy?" And it was his dad. So, just a perfect human guy who everybody could relate to. He wasn't on a pedestal at all. And so when that car did take a checkered flag, or when that car did do well, they're like, you know what? I rode with him today. That's my guy.
Yeah.
And it was all about not having anything, because he really did not have anything. And when he did, going full circle into our conversation here, when he did get the ride with Osterlin at Bristol, and he wins it with a car that's non-sponsored and nobody paid him any attention in the back side of the garage area, it's like, okay, I know he's the kid of Ralph Earnhardt, but maybe this kid's got something. And again, it took some years for him to get polished and know what to do on the racetrack. And he had, for several years, he hit everything except the pace car, maybe even the pace car, because he'd wreck everything, but it's either wreck or win. But that was his style. It's like, I'm going to win, but only thing I might bring back is the steering wheel, but I'm going to give you everything I have. And so he had to, he had to channel that. He had to channel that aggression and that talent into someone who could learn how to drive a race car for 500 miles. That's why David Pearson was so good, especially at Darlington. He realized early in his career, who, by the way, won his first race at Charlotte in 1961 in a number 3 Ray Fox crew chiefed car, and but he learned that early in the game. If you're going to win a 600-mile race, you got to make it all 600 miles, and that's what's so good about Pearson. He'd lay back, and you can't really do that now, but he'd lay back until the last 50 or 75 laps, and then suddenly he'd be up there every time. Well, Earnhardt learned from that. He finally got it. If the light bulb finally came on and said, wow, I got to be at the end of this thing to win. And that's when he started calming down and being able to be strategic about driving the number 3 car. And that's why he won so many races. But just a phenomenal person, man in black, the intimidator, all that. But away from all that, he was just as good a guy, very down to earth and very easy to talk to. And I just loved him. He was a good friend.
He was larger than life to a lot of people. And speaking of one of the tracks that Dale won at, to your point about Dale kind of crashing early in his career, I read a quote one time from Darrell Waltrip that said early in Earnhardt's career, he's like, with every lap with Earnhardt, every lap is a controlled crash. So maybe Darrell was onto something, maybe he wasn't, but certainly Dale by the end of his career had turned it on to a level of performance the likes of which we may never see again in terms of what he could do inside of a race car. Speaking of Dale Earnhardt, Darrell Waltrip, and David Pearson, the track of the week in the third episode of A Lifetime in NASCAR is a place where all three of these guys have won. Unfortunately, it's not on the Cup schedule this year, but it is in a market where they are going back, and that is Nashville Fairgrounds Speedway in Music City, Nashville, Tennessee. A bunch of historic races at that little bull ring. It's where Darrell Waltrip cut his teeth early in his career, and maybe there were reasons that they didn't continue after the 84 season. They were initially on the schedule for 1985. They've run numerous Xfinity Series races since then, but it's been quite a long time since even that division competed there. Now it's primarily for late model racing, but to look at the winners, the last 4 seasons there, they had 2 race dates, and the winners were Darrell Waltrip, Darrell Waltrip, Darrell Waltrip, Darrell Waltrip, Dale Earnhardt, Darrell Waltrip, and Jeff Bodine. So it was basically like we had said about Junior Johnson and North Wilkesboro being the free space on the bingo board for Junior Johnson for wins. That's the way Fairgrounds Speedway Nashville was for Darrell Waltrip in the 1970s and particularly the early to mid 80s. But, to me, Ben, this place is really special. I'd never visited this track until I was 27, I think, and I went and visited it in Nashville the first time I was ever in the city. They weren't racing, so just, toured it. And when I say toured it, I mean the back gate was open, so just kind of walked in and took pictures and then left. But I have seen an ARCA race there in 2016 with a few of my fraternity brothers. And it was such a neat experience because Nashville gives you that old school down home vibe. I mean, it is on a fairgrounds. The fairgrounds is right beside the racetrack. It's not just called that, to call it that. It really is on a fairgrounds, but it has such a charm about it. This racetrack does, and it was so cool to see cars competing there. It was at the warmest, it was 35 degrees. It was positively freezing, even though it was in April of 2016. But it was a ton of fun. I think the most memorable things for me, Jeff Bodine, who won the last Cup race there in '84, he was the Grand Marshal for the race. But I'm always a proponent. I like to mix in with the crowd. And we sat in the grandstands, I wasn't going to cover this race. I wanted to experience Nashville Fairgrounds Speedway. And so, me and my fraternity brothers were going to go get some food during a caution period in the ARCA race, and there was a guy in front of us in a faded Dale Earnhardt jacket. It was those big leather jackets they sold in the 1990s. Mm-hmm. So it was one of those, and by that point it was more than 15 years old. He's in this faded Dale Earnhardt jacket. Dude's in tattered blue jeans, and we're in line at the concession stand, and he just looks at his buddy. He's like, I think I'm going to have to get me some yard bird, which is a phrase I had never heard in my life. And I looked at one of my fraternity brothers who, he grew up in Winston-Salem, but he didn't really grow up a NASCAR fan. He likes it now, but, I looked at him, and I mean, he could barely understand what the guy said. And it took me a second too. But that was the most memorable thing from being there, is just interacting with the people. I think the people are what make racing as fun and as impactful an experience as the racers and the drivers and the race themselves. So for me, hearing that guy, and then kind of having to translate that in my head to, all right, well, he's getting chicken. And what it was they were selling chicken on a stick.
Yeah.
Because you're at the fair, basically. Yeah, there's a race going on, but you're still kind of at the fair. So that's what I got to. I had to get it. When in Rome, right? So
yeah, sure. Absolutely. You got to experience it for sure.
Yeah. And so I was, sitting there in the grandstands eating chicken on a stick, watching an ARCA race, and I don't know how many people have had the pleasure of experiencing that.
I was going to say, what could be better than that?
Yeah, really? It was great. At freezing, I had this light jacket on. I was wearing an old Dale Earnhardt Wrangler hat, I think, as it were. But, so I got some yard bird that day too, and when I see the name Nashville Fairgrounds Speedway, I think of the history that raced there, the fantastic moments Darrell Waltrip's dominance. And I think of that guy who was going to get him some yard bird, and I assume he did. And then it reminds me of that chicken on a stick. And man, that's the craziest thing I've ever eaten at a racetrack.
Yeah, and I guess the memories for me about Nashville is, well, let's see, I am a happy 60-year-old man this year. I turned 60 this year, but when I was 15, it was the year 1975 when Darrell Waltrip won his first Cup race there. And to give you a little background about what he was driving his own number 17 Terminal Transport Chevrolet on a very, very low budget. I think the number was like $25,000. He wasn't getting hardly any money, but the Terminal Transport sponsorship came from a gentleman by the name of Frank Rader. Frank Rader was his father-in-law, who was the president of Texas Gas, and Terminal Transport was a subsidiary of Texas Gas, and of course that was Stevie Waltrip's father, was Frank Rader. So they put Terminal Transport on the car. He had, again, another name, a name that's come up once already tonight, Jake Elder, who was, this is 3 or 4 years before the Dale Earnhardt victory at Bristol. And so he's turning wrenches on the car. But the key to the whole win for Darrell that year was the fact that he had raced at Nashville so many times. He knew all the tricks and all the cracks in the track and all these things. And so he ends up winning the race. But I just remember listening to that race on the radio as a 15-year-old thinking, wow, he just beat the very best in the business in a car that he owned and had sponsorship from his father-in-law. And he has set the world on fire because he's beat all these great champions. And of course, that was the springboard to getting into with DiGard Racing over the next year. And then, winning a bunch of races for DiGard, and came close to winning a championship in '79 and lost it to Richard Petty by only 2 points after dominating the season. That's another story we'll be getting into, I guess, and later on. But Darrell he knew the track. He was there in Nashville, even though he lived in Franklin and still does. But, Nashville Fairgrounds was very much like Richmond Fairgrounds. And basically all it was is that you had an asphalt racetrack with a ribbon of steel guardrail around it. And that's pretty much it. And if you're talking about the original Richmond race track and the original Nashville track. And but you're right. There's such an incredible charm about racing at a track like that because it's grassroots. It's down and dirty on the track as far as the drivers go. I mean, there's no frills, no spills. It's just a great place to race. And, Bowman Gray Stadium in Winston-Salem is a lot that way. That's why they pack the place in the summer when we're not doing the COVID-19, which I hope we're not going to do a lot more of. And they pack the place. And I'm sure that's the way it was with Nashville. But very quickly, a couple of things that come to mind. 1974, I remember that Cale Yarborough and Bobby Allison went to Victory Lane there. And there are photos of Bobby and Cale having a discussion in Victory Lane, and I believe it ended up that Cale ended up winning the race, but Bobby was certain he won it. And there's another time, of course, back in history where Darrell Waltrip and Neil Bonnet both drove for Junior Johnson in the number 11 and 12 Budweiser cars, and they both ended up going to Victory Lane, and I believe the win went to Neil Bonnet that time. So there's been some colorful conversations, let's put it that way, in Victory Lane.
And those are the eras of scoring snafus too, right? So I mean, this was when you had the drivers' wives and girlfriends would do the lap chart for them, and if a guy felt like he won the race, he would just protest. Like now, this isn't an issue because there's so much electronic scoring that even the fan sitting on his couch instantly knows where the car is and how many laps is completed. Well, then you scored races using a pencil and a pad, and one person did. So you had to trust that they got it right. And if a guy behind the wheel thought, I don't think he ran all those laps, then there would be these discussions. And it is wild to think that it was teammates. Speaking of Darrell and all the success he had at Nashville, which, as you made a very great point of it, springboarding his career, he won his first race by more than 2 laps. So, I mean, it was... Cale Yarborough led the most laps in that race and then had an engine failure, but Darrell won that race over Benny Parsons by more than 2 laps. And one of the coolest things, when I look up old race results, I started doing this, and the names in the field of the 1975 Music City USA 420. That was the name of the race. Some of the names, man, like you got very modern names in the Cup Series now. There were no Austins in the Cup Series then. There were no Alexes. There were no Trevors. There was just a different era with guys named Cuckoo, Cecil, Alton, JD, Frank, Rick, Cale, Elmo, Earl, Bill, Jabe, Baxter, Paul Dean, Ed, Richard, Joey, and Buddy. I mean, all kinds of names. And, you know, I think I'm always amused. I looked up the ARCA point standings from the 80s a few months ago versus now, and the names are completely different. As you know, as everything has changed, certainly names change as well, but there were some very notable ones in that race, none more so than Cuckoo Marlin, another Tennessee guy like Darrell who finished third in that race to DW and to Benny Parsons. But yeah, a ton of fun memories at Nashville. I feel very privileged to have one of my own because I don't think there's enough racing there. I'd love to see it back on the Cup schedule, but just the fact that NASCAR is going back to the Nashville market this year, I think is phenomenal. Nashville really as a city, I feel like it's been growing for years. It's a very vibrant place. I'm not a huge country music guy, but you just get into that culture when you're there and you become a part of it, and it becomes a part of you. But from the sporting scene, you know, Nashville's just added a Major League Soccer franchise. They have an NHL team. They have the Tennessee Titans in the NFL. And now they're really getting back into the racing scene nationally by having the NASCAR Cup Series racing at Nashville Super Speedway, which is down the road a little bit from Nashville Fairgrounds and is much, much newer and is a larger racetrack. They'll be racing there. And then also IndyCar is racing in Nashville next year as well. So a lot of great things coming for the city of Nashville, which is one of my favorite cities that I have ever visited, and certainly would love to see them with a Cup date at the fairgrounds sometime in the future. So speaking of all these moments of tracks and of drivers that we've talked about, Ben, do you have any memorable moments from the crew chiefs and all the personalities that you've encountered throughout history?
Oh boy, well, yeah. I mean, there's some great crew chiefs out there, and the first one I guess that comes to mind is a good friend of mine, Dale Inman, who helped Richard Petty to I think it was 197 of 200 victories. But yeah, just he's someone that I've really gotten to know really well over the years. And of course, Leonard Wood, another one that just I think the world of, and just phenomenal crew chiefs in an era where you didn't have a lot of the technology that you do now. They had to run what you brung, if you know what I'm saying there, and measuring the front end alignments with string and all the tricks that, and Jake Elder too, all the tricks that they would come up with that were legal, but they would just come up with just their what I call horse sense, a pen and a pad and a string, and could make a race car turn like magic in a turn. And you know, I'm trying, as I sit here, I'm trying to think of some. Well, here's a good Dale Inman story. Kyle Petty told me this. He said he was so exact with his race cars, with that mentality of the string and the pen and the pad, that he said one of the things he loved to do on Richard's cars, with every screw head on this car had to be, they all had to match. You know, in other words, if you had a screw head that was, three of them were for horizontal and one was vertical, no, you had to go back and change that screw head. And that's when Kyle was working as a crew member. He said he would drive me crazy about, you know, what does it matter that you had four screws and three of them were this way and one's that way? He said, but you got to do them all the right way, because that makes a great winning race car if you turn them all the right way. And sure enough, I mean, that's the kind of mentality that Leonard Wood, Dale Inman, Doug Rickert, who was Dale Earnhardt's first crew chief, those guys were just so good at making something out of nothing and making, in many cases, a fifth place or 10th place car a winning car. There's phenomenal. There's so many. Whitell Wilson. There were so many great crew chiefs of the 60s, 70s. Just the list goes on and on. But that's the ones that come to mind. they're still there. Leonard is still with the 21 team. He's there. He's not a crew chief any longer, but he's a consultant. Same thing with Dale Inman, and that's all they've ever known. And I asked them both, "What would you do if you retired?" He said, "I could never." Both of them said, "I could never retire. What would I do?" I mean, and Richard has said the same thing. What would I do if I was just to retire? I'd sit home and go crazy, and I would end up being back at the racetrack. So don't look for any of those three and many other veterans. They'll live their lives going to racetracks. And all three gentlemen, when I talk about Richard Petty, Leonard Wood, Dale Inman, you couldn't find three nicer guys, three straight up guys. They're the best.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a myriad of guys who have turned wrenches and been tremendous crew chiefs. In a more recent time, Jeff Hammond, who worked with Darrell Waltrip for a long time, and later with Kurt Busch. Larry McReynolds was an absolute legend. Certainly, you can't have any conversation about great crew chiefs and not include Chad Knaus, who has accomplished so much. It's going to be so weird for me, Ben, to know that Chad's not on a box next year because he's moved into a more management competition role at Hendrick Motorsports. He won't be a crew chief in 2021. It's going to be so weird to me because when I think of a great crew chief, I think of Dale Inman and I think of Chad Knaus because they come from two completely different eras, but they have that same commitment to perfection and commitment to excellence. And that's something that really set Chad apart and made him such a great pairing with Jimmy Johnson was, you had in 2002 when these guys first started working together, because Jimmy's crew chief for his partial schedule in 2001 was Ken Howes of Hendrick Management. 2002, you pair this unproven crew chief who was working for Stacy Compton's Kodiak Dodge, this guy from Illinois named Chad, with this guy from California named Jimmy, who used to sleep on his residence for a little while was Ron Hornaday's couch and driving for Herzog Motorsports. Neither one of them had a sterling resume for the opportunity that they had been presented with, and they absolutely knocked it dead for years. And Jimmy deserves so much credit for what that pair accomplished in the number 48 car. But Chad is right there with Jimmy in terms of greatness for his position, how he rose above in an era of engineering where you had to not just be so precise like Dale Inman, you had to outsmart guys because now there's so many other factors that go into making a car fast in terms of wind tunnel testing, aero work. There's so much engineering. It's such an engineering-driven sport now. And every time I talk to a crew chief who is a current one, a recent one like Steve Letarte, or a guy who last called a race on the pit box 20 years ago like Larry Mack, they all talk about how this sport's changed so much from an engineering perspective. It puts even more pressure on every crew chief. He's got to be perfect on his pit calls. He's got to, if you need 2 tires, you got to know when to make that call for 2 tires as opposed to 4. You've got to balance track position with your car's handling for the future. There's so many things that go into being a great crew chief, and there's so much stress in that job. I don't understand how Chad did it for so long at such a high level, but to me, when I think of the greatest crew chiefs, Chad Knaus and Dale Inman are guys that kind of come to the forefront. And we could talk all day about these great crew chiefs, but those are two that really stand out to me, Ben. And Chad's commitment to his work, I think, and Jimmy said this in the past too. That was his life. That number 48 Lowe's Chevrolet for more than a decade. That was Chad's wife. That was Chad's children. That was Chad's family. He was putting everything he had into making sure that car ran great. That car won a bunch of races. And my gosh, they were repaid with so many victories and so many championships. So it's going to be a lot of fun to see who takes that mantle from Chad Knaus and is the next great legendary all-time crew chief. Could it be Rodney Childers with Kevin Harvick? They won 9 races last year. There's a lot of different guys, I think, who could step into that role. And it's going to be very exciting to see who can do it as we get started on 2021.
Right. Well, here's a point I want to make that related to Chad and related to every modern day crew chief, and I guess you could even go back to the era of Dale Inman and Leonard Wood for this too. If you look at an NFL game and you've got two coaches on the sideline, the coach on this side is looking at him, vice versa, and they're trying to play this out and figure out strategies and how to get, of course, the most points during this game, 4-quarter game. When you're looking at a crew chief in the Cup Series or the Xfinity or Trucks, either one, you're battling against 39 other race teams at the same time. So not only are you trying to figure out what your closest competitor is going to do, what about the guy who's second, third, fourth, fifth, eighth, 12th, 15th, whatever the case may be, and you're trying to figure out what their strategies are going to be. So it's got to be nerve-wracking to not only worry about the other race teams, but worry about the complexities of the race itself, your tires, your fuel, the stages, where the cautions fall, all these things. And so, yeah, to be a crew chief in this day and time, it is just phenomenally mental. I mean, that's all it is. It's just mental, not only at the racetrack, but away from the racetrack, trying to figure out all these strategies. But, looking at one of the reasons I want to point out too, one of the reasons Dale Inman was so good as a crew chief was that, this is something Kyle Petty also pointed out to me recently. He said, to be a great crew chief, you have to be a leader, but you also got to be a listener. And Dale was so good at listening to other people's ideas about what to do to make the car faster, as opposed to putting his ego out there, because he'd say, okay, well, let's try that. And sometimes it would be better than what he had in mind. Other times it wouldn't, but he was good at listening to other people's suggestions, a team player, and that's what you got to be. That's why he's the only 8-time Cup Series championship crew chief. He's the only one that's pulled off 8. He did 7 with Richard Petty, and then he did 1 with Terry Labonte in 1984. So that it takes all these things, but I've thought to myself mentally, that's got to be the hardest job on earth, is to figure out what to do, when to do, how to do against 39 other race teams. It's got to be mind-blowing.
So before we wrap up, you bringing that up makes me curious, your opinion of this. Chad Knaus' style as a crew chief, very different from what Dale Inman did. I think Chad liked to run the race team, and I think he more than deserved that power because he proved time and time again how great he was with it. But if you had to say, do you think if you put Richard Petty with Chad Knaus and you put Jimmy Johnson with Dale Inman, do you think either of those, all other things aside the same, do you think that either of those pairings could work?
I don't think they could, and I'll tell you why I say that. I have to go back to eras. Let's look back at Richard Petty's era, and I'm not taking anything away from any other race team, okay? But Richard Petty and Dale Inman were so good at an era when you only had 5, 6, 7 race cars that every week could win.
Yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, there might be 1 or 2 squeakers that would come up and win a race, but generally every week you had maybe 5, 6, 7 cars. Today, you've got 40 cars that potentially could win a race, and we go back to Chris Buescher, we talked about in 2016 winning at Pocono. He didn't get there by accident. He was on the racetrack. He was a competitive car that day, and that competitiveness and that strength will go all the way through 40 cars. So I don't think it would work, because I think you're looking at 2 different eras where they would complement one another, don't get me wrong, but yeah. I think and I've heard Bill Elliott talk about this too. He's like, I don't want to tell Chase Elliott how to drive a race car, because his race car and my race car was just totally different in 2 different eras of racing. I don't know that I could relate to him, and he can't relate to me. So all I would do is mess him up to where he would get confused. I need to leave him alone and let him do his own thing. So I think eras would probably stop that. I think it'd be very respectable among them. They both, driver and crew chief, would have a lot to bring to the table, but the eras in time, I think, would be the difference. And I take nothing away from Dale Inman and Richard Petty, and I take nothing away from Jimmy Johnson and Chad. It's just different competitive eras of our sport.
I do agree, and I think it would have been really interesting to hear Chad and the King. I think those are two as democratic a process as you claim it was for Dale Inman running his race team. Richard Petty and Chad Knaus, to me, are Type A racers, and that what I think is probably what's best because I'm better than everybody else. So that would have been really interesting to see because I see Jimmy and I see Dale Inman as that they are driven by intelligence and that there's the cerebral type, and so is Chad and the King. Don't get me wrong, but I think you could pair those personalities and they'd be pretty similar. More so than if you put, most others with them. But I do agree, it would be pretty wild. And I think the radio conversations of, late 2000s Chad Knaus and early 70s Richard Petty would have been pretty funny, just Dale Inman and Jimmy Johnson.
Yeah, I think so. And one final point here, Aaron, is this. Thinking about a conversation between Dale Inman to Richard and Chad to Jimmy, here's what Dale Inman would say. How are you turning in the corner? Oh, it's a little lower than it was last lap. Okay. With Chad and Jimmy, how are you turning in the corner? Does the circumference of the left tire, you know what I'm saying? I mean, would be this.
It's more technical.
It's way more technical now. And so, it would be kind of funny. I could hear the King saying, huh, what'd you say? I could hear that now.
Yeah.
Because it was like, I don't know, man. It's just the wheels are turning and they're going in the right direction and I'm going lower. So, that's the way, I think that would work out. So, it'd be a difference for sure.
Well said. It would be very interesting, and there's a lot of combinations you could think of. I think the most oil and water one would be Chad Knaus and Dale Earnhardt. I think you eventually would just run into two people that just wouldn't fit. I think when you got that level of greatness, people would think maybe it was a dream team, but I don't think that one would work. I do think there's a possibility that if all other things aside were similar, I think Jimmy Johnson and Dale Inman could win a lot of races and a lot of championships together, but we'll never know. We could always, we could sit here and bench race forever. And I do think that if I had to put two, one from the past and one from I guess he's the past now too in terms of Jimmy Johnson's case, but one of the more recent presents with the guy from the past, I think that'd be a very successful comparison. But it's something that I think a lot of people, if you thought about it, could probably pair some people together that would be very interesting. Dale Inman and David Pearson. I could see Dale Inman and Matt Kenseth working really well together. Chad Knaus and Kurt Busch, probably less so. But
I don't see that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, it's a constant thing. I think that we could think of a bunch of folks, and do that for a long time. But that said, the checkered flag is out on episode 3 of A Lifetime in NASCAR. As I said earlier, Ben, we could probably spend a lifetime talking about our driver of the week, that being Dale Earnhardt.
Yep.
But also talk and expound plenty more. We will on Dale Earnhardt, as well as Jimmy Johnson, Chad Knaus, Richard Petty, Dale Inman, Rusty Wallace, Ernie Irvan, Loy Allen Jr., Jimmy Spencer, Lake Speed, whoever you can think of. We're going to talk about them because I've got a really interesting fact about Loy Allen Jr. that we'll discuss in the next episode, and something that I don't think will ever happen again that Loy Allen Jr. accomplished in 1994. So until then, thanks for listening to episode 3 of A Lifetime in NASCAR. For Ben White, I'm Aaron Burns. We'll be back very soon with episode number 4. We'll probably be back in touch listening to you guys. I should say I'll be listening to Ben. Ben will be listening to me. We'll be talking to you guys. We'll be back with episode 4 quicker than Dale Earnhardt could lap Martinsville. So in the meantime, thanks for listening. So long for now.